Welcome to the Shine Freely podcast. I'm Vicki Reeves. Whoever you are, wherever you're listening, my wish for you is the same as my wish for me, that we may shine freely. Hello. It's been a while, and I've been really soaking in life actually, and feel like I have something I want to share with you all now. So about 2 months ago, I made a post on social media and shared that I had recently broken through a years-long depression. And I wanted to really share the essence of what I learned through that experience. And I was so surprised by the response I got to that post. I kind of haven't been so active on social media lately. I honestly just kind of got tired of it. And I wasn't really expecting much of a response, but I actually had several people reach out to me and all basically said the same thing. I mean, first they were really surprised to know that I had been experiencing depression for a few years. And they were saying things like, I'm starting to wonder if that might be what's going on for me. I'm starting to wonder if I might be depressed. And I was curious, how did you know you were depressed? And what did you do next? Very practical questions. So I wanted to record this podcast episode to basically answer those questions and just share what my own experience has been. So I'm really recording this for anyone who is basically struggling in life, whether that's with depression, anxiety, addiction, burnout, ADD, or just basic stress, exhaustion, sadness, loss, basically just being human. I certainly have experience with all of those forms of suffering, you could say. And maybe for a little backdrop, I'll share where my experience and views come from. Really, the problem of suffering has been, you could say, my focal point my entire life. In a way, you could say I've been obsessed with this problem. It's always seemed so obvious to me that it is the biggest problem. And it is, the one worth solving. And I guess for me, when it comes to suffering in my life, the majority of my suffering has been emotional in nature. Really haven't had so many physical problems or other kinds of outer level practical problems in life. Almost all of my suffering has been in the form of emotions in some way. So that's always been the thing that I'm most fascinated by and most curious about and most interested to really dive into and understand and unlock. So I've pursued all kinds of paths to try to understand better what is all this emotional suffering about, why do we experience it, and what is the solution. And, that journey has taken me all kinds of places. I, on the academic front, got a degree in psychology, which honestly has been, of all the things I've done and experienced, the least helpful in actually shedding some kind of light on what to do and how to understand these problems, but nonetheless, also interesting. And a lot of people find value in the academic, intellectual approach. No problem if that's your thing. Just full transparency that as much as I am, I do have this intellectual mind that just can't stop trying to understand and analyze everything. I don't actually find it valuable. It doesn't lead me to valuable insights. There are other experiences and approaches that have given me far more valuable insight. than that path has. But nonetheless, I have that kind of book on my bookshelf, you could say, where I've really found most of my insights has been through my own direct life experience. And if there's anything I could encourage others in life, it would be to really listen and notice what your own life is telling you. You won't find more wisdom anywhere else. And there's all kinds of ways you can go about noticing, listening, feeling what your own life is telling you. And I encourage you to figure out, what works for you, and explore and experiment till you find what works for you, and then go for that. In my case, I've found incredible value in the spiritual path, the example and teachings of Jesus and the Buddha and other really wonderful, inspiring humans who have taught me and shared with me and exemplified for me what those teachings are really about. And then, of course, using the practices to observe my own experience to gain those insights directly, as opposed to just believing something someone else tells you. I think it's totally important that you experience it directly in your own life, in your own body, your own heart. The spiritual practices have been what have given me the opportunity to do that. And then about, a few years ago, when I was really in the depth of suffering, after experiencing quite a bit of loss in my life, and also just total mental and physical burnout and exhaustion from pushing myself way too hard for way too long, I discovered the work of Gabor Mate and spent a year studying with him in his program called Compassionate Inquiry, which really takes you on a deep dive into your own suffering for the sake of healing it. It's not for the sake of anything else. It's not for the sake of amplifying it, exacerbating it, feeding it, blaming others. None of that has anything to do with it. Although people can get stuck in those games. Then during that time, I was feeling very called to work with plant medicine to discover what there was to discover, particularly as it relates to working with fear. And then I had the opportunity to train in internal family systems. And that really offered me the approach that I needed to get out of my head, which all of the things I've been describing, my spiritual practices, the compassionate inquiry, and the plant medicine work, were all certainly ways that were helping to train and build my capacity to do that, to get out of my head. But it wasn't until I found internal family systems and started using it that I really started to experience what it felt like to get out of my head, and really started to experience what it feels like to release suffering. So that's kind of the backdrop of, what types of experiences and information have led to where I am today. And just that, that's kind of what I'm basing everything on. So with that, for anyone out there who's just feeling completely lost in life, or perhaps dominated by fear or hopelessness, or just simply like dissatisfaction with life, these are the things I want to share with you. Well, the first thing is just on a really practical level, if you're having this thought of, I don't know if I'm depressed, maybe I'm depressed, how do I know? What do I do? What does that mean? I thought I would just share on a simple level, what the experience is like for an everyday American like myself to go to the doctor and say, I think I might be depressed. You might wonder what happens. What happens when you call your doctor and say, I want to make an appointment because I think I might be depressed? I can tell you exactly what will happen. This has happened to me twice in my life, once when I was 16 and then another here in my late 30s. So what'll happen is the nurse probably will give you this little questionnaire and you'll answer 9 questions. And for each of these questions, you're asking, over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by the following problems? And you can answer not at all, several days, more than half the days, or nearly every day. So the questions are, in the last 2 weeks, how often have you had little interest or pleasure in doing things? How often have you been feeling down, depressed, or hopeless? How often have you had trouble falling or staying asleep or sleeping too much? How often have you been feeling tired or having little energy? How often have you had a poor appetite or have been overeating? How often have you been feeling bad about yourself or that you are a failure or have let yourself or your family down? How often have you had trouble concentrating on things, such as reading or watching TV? How often have you been moving or speaking so slowly that other people could have noticed? Or so fidgety or restless that you've been moving a lot more than usual? And lastly, how often have you had thoughts that you would be better off dead or thoughts of hurting yourself in some way? And then you might also get a screening for anxiety. I did. I expressed that was something I was struggling with. It's a very similar questionnaire. Over the last 2 weeks, how often have you been bothered by the following problems? With your answer choices being not at all, several days, more than half the days, or nearly every day. So how often have you been feeling nervous, anxious, or on edge? Not being able to stop or control worrying? Worrying too much about different things? Trouble relaxing? Being so restless that it is hard to sit still? Becoming easily annoyed or irritable? Or feeling afraid as if something awful might happen? So those are the questions for anxiety. From there, probably what happened for me, what seems to be the standard practice. The doctor will come in, they'll look at your answers, they'll say, okay, looks like you are receiving a diagnosis for depression and anxiety, and here are some medications that you can try. And I recommend you see a therapist. And that's pretty much it. That's all that happens. Yeah, and then, you're totally free, by the way, to choose what you do with that information. You certainly do not have to take the medication. You certainly can try it. You can try it, and if it doesn't work, you can try another one. Or you can not try medication. You can try other things. There are actually many different things that are effective in treating depression, and medication is actually not very effective. But that's certainly not meant to demonize that choice at all. It's a choice that I've made during these 2 different periods of my life. I used it for a temporary period to just kind of take the edge off enough to be able to do what I needed to do to process what I was going through. And personally, that's my, I guess you could say, like, philosophy about medications for things like depression and anxiety. I see them as potentially useful, temporary solutions, maybe akin to like training wheels on a bike. It's never the idea that you just keep these training wheels on forever. but they might be able to give you enough stability to where you can do the other work that you need to do to move through the experience and get your life in order, however you want your life to be, which is totally up to you. So that's the first thing to know. That's what'll happen if you go to the doctor. If you have a good doctor, maybe someone that's a bit more attuned to lifestyle medicine, they might ask you questions about nutrition, movement, sleep, sunlight exposure. So those are all things that play a significant role in depression. And of course, our relationships and life in general. So knowing all of that, then, what have I learned? The first thing that I learned was really, really about being honest with myself about the fact that I was suffering. I had developed quite a strong habit of ignoring and avoiding suffering. And I had incredibly strong justification in my mind. I had, checked for all the holes in my reasoning, and I'd come up with a very strong argument for why I should not take suffering seriously. And I was very convinced that I was right. And I was very good at just basically pretending that it wasn't in my life. And I just kept telling myself not to focus on it and to focus on working for others. And I did this for so long that I completely neglected my own basic needs of being human. And it's honestly impressive to me that I was able to do that for as long as I did. But it's certainly not a sustainable approach to life. If you are not able to recognize your own needs, then you are also not able to meet them. And there's actually nothing wrong with having needs. It doesn't make you weak. It doesn't make you immature. It doesn't make you self-centered. It just makes you human. And I think one of the reasons that we can be really bad at acknowledging our own needs is that we have this funny tendency as humans to attribute blame for everything. And basically what I had going on, which may sound familiar for you, is it was like, well, if I'm suffering, then it's my fault. I'm to blame, which sets off a chain of an incredible amount of self-judgment and eventually self-hatred, really, and really denying oneself, denying one's needs, almost as if you've, locked yourself in a basement and you're just saying, no, you don't get to come out. You don't get to be cared for because it's your fault. So the first thing that I had to learn to do was to just acknowledge that I was suffering to myself. And it's kind of like lifting a rug or maybe looking under a bed that you haven't cleaned for, who knows, years. And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, there is a bunch of shit under there. Like, that's an incredible amount of shit. I had no idea all that shit was under there. And it's a really, really important and necessary step of the process to honestly acknowledge how much suffering we have in our life. And guess what? It's not your fault. It's no one's fault. Suffering is the nature of human existence. There is no one who has walked on this earth who has not suffered. So if you are suffering, it does not mean you are bad. It just means you're human. Now, of course, there is a world of a difference between blame and responsibility. Blame is so silly. It's like, I don't know, maybe if let me think of a good example here. Oh, it's just, I mean, actually, it has no value. It's like if you had a plant. No, not even in your house. You look outside in the forest, some wild area. There's a plant, and it's starting to droop, starting to turn brown. And is it the plant's fault? Of course it's not. It's simply a fact that the plant has needs for things like water, sunshine, and those needs are not being met. It's not because the plant is bad. And if the plant could make a choice to water itself, which I guess plants don't really have the ability to do, but let's imagine that this plant is more like a human, and this human is suffering and is drooping. Would it be helpful for that human to tell themselves, oh, I'm so bad for drooping. It's my fault that I'm drooping. Or would it be more helpful for that human to say, I'm drooping. It appears that I have a need that's not being met. And at that moment, instead of assigning blame, what a human has a chance to do is to take responsibility. And that does not mean blaming themselves for getting to this state of being droopy. Gabor Mate has a beautiful description of what it means to take responsibility for our own experience. It means to have a response ability. That is the ability to respond to the present moment. And if you're drooping and the present moment is that you have a need that's not being met, then how can you respond to that? Do you have the ability to respond to that in the present moment? It's very often, very, very often, what we are responding to is either a memory of the past or an expectation of what's going to happen in the future. And regardless of whether it's in the past or our idea of what might be in the future, we react to either with a basic level of aversion. We simply don't like it. We don't like these painful memories from our past where we blamed ourselves for some kind of painful experience we had. And we don't like these fears of what might happen in the future, not knowing. So we simply push them away. And if you start openly exploring your relationship to your own past, you will start to see for yourself that very often what is happening in your present life, whether it's at home or at your job or with your pets or kids, spouses, friends, neighbors, or even those people on social media. Whatever kind of reaction that you're having inside is coming from your past. You have a wound. You will find, I mean, I'm not trying to convince you of this. This is what you will find when you look inside. You will find that you have a wound, something you experienced at some point in your life. And particularly if you are a young child, when we are young children, we are, well, as humans, we're these meaning-making machines. We just have this insatiable desire to assign meaning to everything that happens. It's kind of the cause of all of our suffering, actually, in a way. But it's fun. And as children, we all go through a developmental phase of whatever it is that we're experiencing. The only way we know how to interpret it as a child is to make it out to be that it's our fault that this thing happened. Whatever it is, whether it happened to someone else or happened to us, or we saw it or felt it or anything. When you are a child, no matter how wonderful your conditions are and all of the people around you, you will go through a phase of interpreting whatever happens to be your fault. It's completely normal. And if something very painful happens to you during that period and you interpret it to be your fault, it's maybe like a seed of a relationship with yourself, one which is not loving, one which is, based on disappointment or frustration or anger or even hatred or just utter sadness, betrayal. You could feel betrayed by your own self. You can feel let down by your own self, feel attacked by your own self. But basically, not a totally open, loving, accepting relationship with yourself. Your relationship with yourself will determine the way you experience your own life. And it is worthwhile to cultivate a useful, positive, open, loving relationship with yourself. And it's not easy. It's not obvious at first that would even be a worthwhile thing to do. For much of my life, I had this idea that the self is bad, that the self is limited and selfish and immature and basically not worth paying any attention to. And I would kind of take spiritual teachings and in my very confused interpretation of them, I would use them to reinforce this idea that the self is bad. Others are good, the self is bad. And after deeply exploring that perspective for the last few years, I can now say that I have entirely changed my relationship to myself and my relationship to suffering. I used to view suffering as a race with a finish line at the end. And I wanted to race as hard and as fast as I could to get to the finish line of this suffering so that I didn't have to suffer anymore. And I was so frustrated that I always felt like I just wasn't going fast enough. I needed to get there faster. I needed to be there already. I needed to be there yesterday across the finish line. And like, why wasn't I getting there? It must be my fault again. There we go. My fault. And it was just unbelievably annoying, discouraging, disappointing. Yeah. And well, miserable. It was miserable. Also was pissed off that it was, I really didn't want to be a burden on others. It's been like a lifelong problem for me. I'm sure many of you can relate this feeling that like, if I suffer, then I'm a burden on others and I can't have that. The last thing I can be in the world is a burden on others. I never, ever, ever want that. So I'll just take all the burden on myself so no one else has to feel it. And I'll be a burden on myself. Well, I no longer think that there is an end to suffering. I do believe and have moments of directly experiencing that there is an experience which is beyond suffering. But it doesn't exclude suffering. The experience which is beyond suffering includes suffering because it includes everything. The experience which is beyond suffering is not afraid of suffering. It has no aversion to it. It can be with suffering, and it's not a problem. And I am very inspired by the way that This example was shown through the life of Jesus, actually. He really demonstrated how suffering is not something to be avoided. Obviously, we don't want to cause it either, and we don't want to hold on to it when it appears, and we don't want to feed it or make more of it. But there is a way to be with it when it does appear, because it will appear, because it is the nature of this human experience that we're all having. And it's okay, and it's no one's fault. Suffering will arise. The question is, can you be with it in a way that's not problematic? And I am so confident that the answer is yes, you can. Others can. We can. There is a way to be with suffering such that suffering is no longer a problem. You might still feel it, and it might still feel unpleasant, but are you able to open your arms to that unpleasant feeling the same way you would if a child was scared or sad, and just be with them? You don't have to fix it. You don't have to make it go away. You don't have to even understand it or analyze it or make sense of it. All you have to do is be with it with compassion. Can you keep your heart open in a moment of fear or loss, despair? Can you be with that experience with an open heart? The same way the sun shines on everything, whether it's suffering or whether it's experiencing joy, the sun just keeps shining. And I know now, because I had to learn how to do it myself, I know now that every single one of us has the capacity, the ability, the wisdom, and the compassion to be with our own suffering. And once you learn how to do that, how to be with your own suffering, which mostly just requires courage, curiosity, compassion, and patience. If you do not have patience, you can't get there. The opposite of patience is something like either force or resistance, which I guess resistance is just another form of force, really. If you have force, if you're trying to force yourself to heal or force yourself to be happy, it's not going to work. It's simply not the right medicine for the ailment. The right medicine is patience, acceptance. So there's this quality of gentleness that's necessary to cultivate, particularly toward yourself. And it's okay every time you notice, oh, there I go judging myself again. There I go attacking myself again. There I go having doubt in myself again. That's okay. It's totally okay. You're human. And guess what? You're noticing what you're experiencing. And that is the most important step, actually, is becoming aware of our own suffering. I honestly believe that. I honestly believe that just noticing your own experience, if you keep doing that over and over again, if you just keep noticing, now I feel like shit. Oh, I'm noticing I am being cruel to myself again. Oh, I'm noticing that I'm exhausted. Whatever it is, just keep noticing over and over and over as many times a day as you can. And as you continue to wrap your awareness around your own experience, this act of noticing and then offering compassion, which doesn't really need to be much. It can simply be noticing that I'm exhausted and letting myself sit down for 5 minutes. Or noticing that I'm exhausted and I was starting to tell myself that I'm somehow at fault. And just simply reminding myself, oh, I'm exhausted. It's not my fault. It's just because I didn't sleep enough, eat well, or it's because this stressful thing is happening in my life, or whatever it is. Myself just needs a little bit of care. The same way this plant, when it was drooping, just needed a little more water, a little more sunshine. Self just needs some love. So in the first probably year or two, maybe 2 years of this process for me, it was really training myself to just notice every time I'm suffering. I had such a strong habit of just blocking it out completely and not allowing myself to even acknowledge that I was suffering. So just noticing it, and then every time, and whatever, the smallest way possible. What's the smallest thing possible that I could do right now to offer myself some compassion? What's the smallest step I could take today to meet one of my needs? The smallest step. What is the smallest step that you could take today to meet one of your needs that's not being met? And this tendency that we have to avoid our suffering, to ignore it or deny it or push it away, distract ourselves from it through whatever kind of addiction we have, whether it's social media or alcohol, drugs, eating, sugar, whatever ways we have of trying to escape our suffering. This aversion to suffering is the problem. It's not the suffering itself that's the problem. It's just our resistance to it. Because as long as we're resisting it, we will never learn how to be with it. And we have to learn how to be with it, because there is no erasing it. There's no getting rid of it. There is no planet where suffering does not exist. The best thing we can do is not to train ourselves to avoid it and resist it and deny it and ignore it. The most effective thing we can do is to accept it. Accept that there is suffering in this world, in this life, in your life, in your body, in your heart. There is suffering. The question is, can you wrap your awareness around your own suffering and accept it? And what I have learned through my own direct experience is that when you can learn to be with your suffering, it is no longer a problem. You don't actually have to do anything about your suffering. All you have to do is to learn how to be with it. And then something remarkable happens. Once you learn how to be with it, its needs are met. Guess what happens when your needs are met? Suffering's not really a problem. So you will actually suffer less. And you will do things. You will take better care of yourself. You will eat better and move your body and get some sunlight and drink some water and speak kindly to the people in your life and support them in whatever way you can. All of these things will happen on their own when you learn how to be with your own suffering. And it's been remarkable to witness that this whole process of learning how to be with our own suffering is incredibly simple. You do not need to go study the central nervous system to learn how to do this. You can if you want, and if you find that helpful and it, intrigues your brain, go for it. No problem. But you don't actually need any kind of intellectual understanding. If you have the type of mind that's, let's say, addicted to intellectual activity, which I certainly do have that type of mind, and I find it slightly annoying, honestly. Sometimes I just want to turn it off. And basically what I've experienced is that I need to give my intellectual part enough, I need to feed it enough intellectual understanding so that it's basically calms down and it's like, oh, okay, I'm good now. I've got my fill for the day. I can sit back now and let the rest of this system do its work. So it's fine, seek out whatever kind of intellectual understanding you want. The one tip I'll offer is that will not lead to healing. You cannot intellectualize your way to or your way out of suffering. But get enough intellectual understanding so that your intellectual part can relax, so that your brain can calm down. But okay, I can chill out now. Now that I've found out it's not my fault for sure, now I can chill out. Or, maybe you like to have an idea of the roadmap and where you're going before you start stepping that way. And that's fine. You can do all that. Just know that you have to go further than that. That won't take you all the way. You have to experience directly how to be with your own suffering. And in order to experience that, in order to learn how to do that, it means you have to allow your suffering to be present in the first place. If you try to put it under the rug, in the basement, you try to throw it out the window, you try to ignore it, pretend that it doesn't exist, you will never learn how to be with it. It's not possible. And what happens then when we don't learn how to be with our own suffering and we pretend that it's not there inside of us, what happens is that every time we see some form of it in the outside world, or we're reminded subconsciously of the suffering that exists within us, we see it in others, in their lives, we will project all of our resistance to that suffering onto these other people in our life or situations, whatever it may be. And this, of course, causes all kinds of drama and confusion and complications and basically takes all the fun out of life. So we have to learn how to allow our own suffering to be present, to accept that we are suffering, and then to embrace it. And what I mean by embrace, really, when I think of the word embrace, I always imagine like open arms, wrapping your arms around another human and embracing them. A warm embrace. That is what we do to our own suffering. And in that moment of embrace, it's like a total transformation happens. It's like, it's like alchemy, actually. You could say like the flavor, the taste of the suffering changes completely. And it becomes this flavor of sweetness and richness and basically a flavor that everything is okay. Nothing is wrong. Nothing is unacceptable inside of us. Obviously, there's all kinds of things that are wrong in the world, and there's all kinds of things happening that are totally unacceptable. But what is happening inside of you? What experience are you having? Are you allowing that experience to be present? First, you just have to allow it, even if you don't like it. It's okay if you don't like it. Can you get curious about it? Curiosity is an incredible guidepost, perhaps, like a guiding star or something like that. If you can just keep bringing yourself back to curiosity, I actually think that can take you the whole way to healing. Compassion can sometimes feel hard, in my opinion. For me, it's usually pretty easy to feel towards others, but feeling compassion toward myself was very, very difficult for me before. And it wasn't something I could just do. But curiosity feels much easier. It feels easier to get curious. So the question is, can you get curious about your own suffering? Will you allow yourself to get curious about your own suffering? You don't have to like it. You don't have to love it. You don't have to accept it yet. The first step is just to get curious. That curiosity being the opposite of rejecting, denying, ignoring, avoiding our suffering. Curiosity is open, has this open quality to it. It doesn't judge. It's just curious. It just wants to learn and know more about what is this thing. If you can get curious and stay curious toward your suffering, you will start to discover what this suffering is all about. At this step in particular, I have to mention internal family systems. I really learned how to get curious about my suffering through compassionate inquiry. And then internal family systems really gave me what I needed to take that curiosity and find the insights that were going to allow me to then really accept this suffering. Because once you get curious about your suffering and you ask certain questions toward it and about it, you will start to discover that at the root of all of your suffering is actually love. All of the things that we're doing, different parts of ourselves, different experiences we've had, they're all an attempt to experience love. That's the motivation. Probably the most profound thing I've ever heard in my life was asked to a incredible teacher, the most impressive human I've ever met, who was teaching on a Buddhist prayer that talked about rejoicing in the actions of all beings. And I asked him, how can we rejoice in actions that are harmful? And he said, because all actions are born from the wish for happiness, and we can rejoice in that. Now, he said that actually 15 years ago, and I'm only just now understanding what he meant. It took a while. But what I found through this work of exploring my own suffering with curiosity, what I found was all of it had a root in love and compassion and this desire for myself or others to be happy. It was all about trying to make either me or others happy. And that's a beautiful thing. Our nature, whatever it is that we're born with, wherever this life comes from, whatever its origins are, its nature is to seek out love. It wants to experience love. We're born with this desire to experience, feel, and share love. That is incredible. And out of this desire to experience love, then we end up doing all of these things and thinking all these things and saying all these things and attempting all these things. And some of them cause suffering. If we really trace it back, we'll find love at the root of all of it. But guess what? We'll never find that if we can't first just acknowledge that we're suffering and allow that suffering to be there. Because we have to allow it to be there in order to explore it. Once we explore it, we find out, this was all about love the whole time. I was just wanting to experience love. I think I can accept that, actually. It seems quite reasonable. I think I can stop blaming myself for wanting to experience love. I think I can really appreciate whatever that is, that part of me or that source or that nature of that I was born with, of wanting to experience love. I can really embrace that, celebrate that, express gratitude for that, which is inside of myself. So I'm expressing gratitude toward myself. because I can see that my own nature is love. And once we find that, then tomorrow, when some difficult thing happens and we experience loss, because we can be sure that we will experience loss many times in this life. We cannot avoid it. But can we remember in those moments everything we learned about allowing the experience of suffering, accepting it, and embracing it, wrapping our awareness around it with love? I can tell you that it feels really good. It feels really good in the body. It feels really good in the heart. And the mental activity totally calms down, becomes more clear and more peaceful. Internal family systems has been an incredible model for me, an incredible approach to work with, as it really gave me kind of on a practical level of the how. How do I learn how to allow, accept, and embrace my suffering? How do I learn to be with my suffering with compassion? For me, I tried several things, and they've all really contributed to each other and worked together in a quite a beautiful way. But for me, internal family systems really kind of pull it all together. It gave me the how. I've been working with clients using the internal family systems model now and continue to see profound results. I continue to have a profound experience inside myself as I'm doing it. It definitely seems to be my jam. Yeah, I don't know, maybe my calling or something like that. I'm never quite sure exactly what a calling is, but I can tell you this, that at the end of an hour or two of doing internal family systems with a client, I feel more energy than when I started. And it is the first thing that I've discovered in my life that actually gives me energy instead of taking energy. Most things seem to take energy, but every time I have that experience, it's very reaffirming to me that it's a worthwhile way to spend my time, let's say. So it's probably a nice segue for me to offer that to any of you who may be interested. I'd be very glad to do a free session with you if you want to try it out. You can book a time directly on my website, shinefreely.com. And there's no obligation to continue. I find it totally valuable, interesting experience for me to offer a free session to anyone who's curious to try it out. So you're welcome to do that. And there's no, obligation to continue with paid sessions. But of course, that's always an option as well if that's something you're interested in. So I wanted to keep this as simple as possible. In general, I value simplicity. I feel like my life is becoming more simple every day, and I love it. It feels so good in my body. And I would love to share more with you all, whoever's listening to this, whoever is just looking for a little bit of support, encouragement, guidance, or understanding. Yeah, I hope to share more, and we'll see what it is that I want to share. But this was the main point that I wanted to share so far, that we do not need to race to the finish line of the end of suffering. All we need to learn to do is to turn toward it and be with it. And once we learn how to be with it, it is no longer a problem. So in closing, I'll just share with you the words that I had posted on social media a few months back. And these words are from a book by Richard Rudd, who has an incredible body of work known as the Gene Keys. And it very precisely describes the experience that I went through getting out of my depression. And hopefully I've managed to convey a little bit of it in this past hour here, but In case I haven't, let me share these words with you from Richard Rudd to leave you with. Allow, accept, embrace, the 3 stages of breakthrough. Breakthrough has 3 distinct stages that can help us surrender more deeply to the process. These stages can also help give us a solid sense of where we are in our own emotional terrain, as well as where we are heading. The first stage is about allowing the painful feelings. Whether the feeling is anger, fear, numbness, resentment, grief, or any other emotion, the first step is to simply allow yourself to feel it. You don't have to like it or accept it. You can even hate the feeling. To allow the feeling is to provide some space around it. Until you allow the feeling in, you are in denial of the pain, and it will fester in your psyche. The beauty of allowing is that it is so generous. There is no pressure from allowing. We just take a peek at the pattern. We can even close the door again if it seems too painful. Allowing is a process in which we gradually open the door wider over a period of time. The second stage occurs when we have done a certain amount of allowing. Acceptance occurs as we begin to get used to the discomfort. We realize that the emotional pain will not kill us. It can seem overwhelming. It can seem terrifying. It can make us feel irritated or deadened or filled with rage. As we come to accept a negative pattern, it is rather like taking in a stray dog or cat that has been abused. It takes time to rebuild trust. That hurt part of our psyche needs this acclimatization period in which we gradually come to realize the depth of our pain. Whereas allowing makes space for all manner of feelings and extremes, acceptance brings us to a deeper and more mature place in which we are authentically facing our own pain and difficulty with love and understanding. The final stage is embracing, and it is the culmination of any breakthrough. Once an emotional shadow pattern has been fully accepted at the deepest level, it is effectively purged from our system. The painful memory that gave rise to the difficulty has been met with our deepest, most heartfelt compassion. It has been allowed to express itself without being projected onto another as blame. Neither have we in any way repressed the shadow as something shameful that we wish to forget. Over a period of time, through our great courage, the pattern has been transformed, and in a beautiful twist, it has become something remarkable. It has become grace. Grace can take many forms. It can come as forgiveness, self-empowerment, humility, or any other profound sense of emotional resolution. The essence of the breakthrough is that our pain reveals its true higher purpose, which is to bring us a profound sense of wholeness and love. Those are the words of Richard Rudd, and I have nothing to add. If you are on this journey, I wish you the most adventurous time. I admire your courage, and I offer you my support. And I look forward to being with you. Until then, be well.